Uh, Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to the Narrative Design for XR panel. We're each going to give kind of quick little presentations, and then if there's time, take some QA at the end. Otherwise, we'll be up front there for your questions. So to lead it off, I am Danny Cannizzaro. I am one of the co-founders of TenderClaws, which is a kind of interactive game studio, VR studio. And we just recently released our 2-hour narrative game called Virtual Reality. And Virtual Reality is kind of this narrative comedy about VR, AI, and humanity's kind of inevitable future as well-kept pets. So, quick trailer.
Activitude. You will enter the constructed realities of AI clients. Simply put on and remove different virtual labor access points to jump into realities.
So when we started making this game about VR, we really paid attention to the medium. And we started looking at what is an important distinction of the medium of VR when we're crafting a story for it. And one of the things we came to was both the feeling of presence that virtual reality can provide and the kind of complication that comes with that, in that you have to start defining your player's relationship to the story itself. Is the player a ghost in the space? Are they an active participant? For virtual reality, we were lucky in that we could kind of let the player just be themselves. They could come to the story as someone putting on a VR headset and experiencing it for the first time. We could even play with this kind of silliness. The game will tell the player to take off their headset, to like put down the controller. It can make reference of the fact that they are sitting there in their house with a headset on because it's a game about kind of virtual reality. And then also looking at the medium, we started to look at the idea of interaction. And interactivity seemed kind of inherent to the medium. Even if you distill virtual reality down to like the most simple 360 video sphere form, it still forms a game in which the player is looking around, is choosing what part they're looking at. It's an inherently interactive medium. And so with the interaction that we created, we wanted to tell a story where we as authors still kind of kept control of the plot, but let the player have room to play, to experiment, to ask questions. So kind of the model we looked at was when a friend tells you a story or a parent tells you a bedtime story, they're controlling the overall kind of like direction of the plot, but you can ask them questions. What happens next? You can ask for more details. And the way that players ask for details in a game like ours is through the interactions. And so the interactions that they do become the way that they can interact with the story system. So in our game, because it's one about virtual reality, one of the main interactions is putting on and removing virtual headsets. And this was important to us that the player's way of engaging with the story is very tied to the story itself, that there isn't a disjunct between kind of what you're doing and what it's about, that the interactivity itself can become part of the story and not just kind of a delivery mechanism of more story. So other than putting on headsets, you can also grab and manipulate objects in space. And what interests us with this is not putting limits on it, that if you give the player ability to do some interaction, to let them do it constantly, consistently, even if it kind of works against where you as the author would like the story to go. So in this one, we made our main character very grabbable. If the player can grab any object, they should be able to grab every object whenever they want. If they put on a headset, they should be able to take it off. And by giving the player kind of that freedom, we create this sense of a big range of possibility. The world seems to open up, and it feels like you have this space of possibility in which they can explore, in which they don't feel kind of like guided down one specific direction. The opposite side of that is, as authors, we definitely do have a direction we're trying to guide them. We had a very specific 3-act structure in our story. And so it kind of became our role to create these systems, these narrative systems that would guide the player into the area we wanted them to go, but as subtly and non-coercively as possible. And so I like to think about it as kind of like a narrative auto-aim, where at first, we try and let the players stumble upon the space we want them to go. If we want them to happen upon a headset, we'll at first let that chance encounter possibly happen. For example, there's a space in the game where we have a giant box of headsets that falls. And there's one headset, it's the one in the bottom there, that is the hacked headset. And it takes you to a very specific kind of plot point in the narrative. But rather than just immediately have that headset be there, we want the player to chance encounter it and to feel like they were the one that finds it. So when the box first falls, it's not even there, and they just take a random headset. When they come back from that world, we place the headset there and hope that they pick it. We try and place it in their field of vision, but if they don't pick it, we then start making it vibrate the next time they come back. And then the final time, if they still haven't picked that one headset, we will ultimately swap whatever headset they do pick to be that one specific plot point. And so going back to the narrative auto-aim, it kind of becomes this practice of trying to let them stumble upon the plot, because if they find it of their own accord, it feels more natural and it feels more rewarding, but being mindful of having a full trajectory of where we want them to go so that we can move them along towards the story's natural conclusion. So thank you. That was my brief little one. And here's Emilie.
Thanks. Nice talk. Hi, everyone. I've been working with storytelling and new technologies for about 10 years, and I'm an interaction designer. And when I started working with VR and AR, what I really wanted to do is simplify the process of interactivity for me, but ultimately also for others. As he said, VR and AR are inherently interactive, and storytelling and interactivity are really the founding blocks of what a good VR and AR experience can be. So what we decided to work on is, and I'm going to present it to you today, is Spatial Stories. It's a content creation platform for interactive VR content production, and it's completely code-free. So that was for me first, but hopefully that will be for you. It's a pipeline in which you can script write, set up your interactivity with a drag and drop system, and it has an implementation in Unity, and I just want to quickly go through the logic of that Unity implementation. So, when you're writing a story and when you're writing a book, or if you're making a film or doing something with CGI, you're trying to trick your audience into believing in the world that you're creating. And when you're working with VR and AR, the person that you need to fool is, well, it's your user. So the way it works is we're giving you a full camera rig, and you get access to all of the inputs that you might need to play around with your user. So whether it's the head, the eyes, the hands, the ear, and the mouth, and all of these zones are interactive zones. And with a simple drag and drop system, you're going to be able to have your user interact with the virtual world. And as technology goes, obviously there's going to be new things like eye tracking, brain waves are coming soon, facial recognition. And the goal is to make that really easy and accessible and have you use that as tools to create new interactive stories. So you'll obviously want the world around to interact with that user. So we've created a system in which you can import all of your 3D assets in Unity and turn them into interactive objects by just clicking on them. And after you do that, you're going to get access as well to different interactive zones on all of your 3D models, and you can choose what they are, as well as a proximity zone. And in the Unity editor on the right-hand side, you'll be able to very quickly define conditions and actions for that object. So conditions can be looking at it, it can be being closer to it, it can be a combination of both. It can be grabbing it, snapping it, anything that your mind sets up to. And the actions can be animation, audio, particles, and that's just a really simple drag and drop interface to do that. We started working this year on a project called Break a Leg. It's a co-production with Oculus and AMD. and it's an interactive adventure where you are trapped in the backstage of a theater and you are forced to do a performance on a stage. It's a project that it's 100% code-free, and it's been built using the SDK, so it's a good example of what you'll be able to achieve using the system.
This fine piece of galactic machinery was sealed by Houdini's great-great-aunt Maggie in person. It beholds all the secrets to the ultimate power of the galaxy. Your performance is about to start. Don't mess up, okay?
Sorry. So this is a view from the scene, the inspector scene in Unity. So on the right-hand side, what you can see are all of the interactive objects inside the backstage of Brick-a-Leg. So all of these objects react to the user in many different ways, and they add to the overall experience. The trick is to be imaginative and then use them in combination with one another to create new ways of interacting for your user, and also make sure that it is magical and easy to use. You can be very creative, have those interactions drive him through the narrative in many different ways. I have a couple of design tips. They're just more suggestions than anything, but the first thing that we've noticed is that you need to create a world to explore rather than a narrative. Whether you're trying to have your user go from point A to point B, give him a space. Make sure that every object in your scene has a story or is part of the narrative so that it's just not there randomly. Build a world, build something that will get your users and your players excited, and make sure that every little detail is part of the overall arc to make sure that it all feels consistent and not just gimmicks. Also make each interaction meaningful. That really means make sure that if someone is grabbing something, it's for a good reason, and that all of the interactivity that you're putting together, they really have a sense inside your overall story so that they're not just here for fun, but they're here for a specific reason, and that's part of your plot. I'm going to leave you with this little quote. So that's a quote from a magician in 1935, and he says, "No trick is worth performance if the secret of how it is done is more important than the impression it makes on the audience." So in other words, if your users or your audience, they don't notice the tricks that you've put together and they don't see the technology anymore, it's where you're going to know that you've created a really cool VR and AR experience. Thank you.
We got, is there anything coming up? Oh. One moment.
In there.
Okay.
Bring it back up.
All right. Hey guys. Oops. So my name is Amy Stewart, and I am the head of narrative at Construct Studio. We're a content creator is dedicated to creating a VR interactive narrative. And today I want to talk about control. So creators love to be in control. It's why we create. We want to perfect every tiny thing that we're working on so that the viewer has the emotional reaction that we want to create. But VR is a bit of a different beast in this respect, because what's so powerful about VR is the amount of freedom that the players, the viewers have. They can look around at whatever they want. They can ignore what you've put there. They have hands, so they can pick up objects and look at them or just throw them away. They can move around the space. So how do we deal with this? How do we make a full, strong narrative arc when, and preserve this feeling of freedom? So we had these questions when we were working on The Price of Freedom, which is our studio's first experience. It's available for free on Vive, and it is based on true story set during the Cold War of the CIA and some of the pretty shady things they were doing around that era fighting the Cold War. So you take the role of Agent Zero. Your task is to assassinate a man named Benjamin Miller. And Miller had broken into the CIA, stolen some important documents, and you're cleaning up this mess. So it's essentially a room escape style play. Players move through the room, they can look at wherever they want, they can ignore everything, and that's how they move through the experience. I have a short clip that shows you how that plays out. This is a Let's Player that put up a video. We have
Hello there,
audio. Yeah.
Mr. President-elect Kennedy. Dear Wilhelm, this is just one of the many documents I was able to steal from Westgate. I will bring the rest with me to Berlin. Benjamin. Ah, more evidence. Katie's room, office. He's going to move soon. He's trying to escape. Beautiful wife and daughter, that's for sure. Shame I need to kill him soon.
So we designed the world so that everything in it tells the story, which that point was brought up excellently before. So, even if the player ignores that letter completely, they see the moving boxes that tell you he's leaving. They see the pictures on the wall that tell you he has a family. The speech on the radio and the magazine tell you what the era is and what the mood of it was at the time. And all these things work together to let you understand what's going on. And we also designed our rooms so they are essentially forming a narrative arc. Everything in the experience, so each room is primed to tell you a specific part of that story, answer certain questions, and raise new ones. And anything that's a really important part of the plot, we will repeat more than once in different objects. So if you thoroughly explore, if you just kind of breeze through, you still get a sense of what's going on. So that's great for telling the story about the world and the characters and what's happening around you, but we wanted you to be part of this world. So here's a second clip. This is the moment when this player found Benjamin, and then a little bit of that aftermath.
Eliminates a target.
Sure. Sweet dreams. Dear Ben, I am worried about the extraordinary claims you've been making following Katie's death. If the CIA is really doing what you are accusing them of at Westgate, you are going to need some hard evidence before I can believe you. And is that a picture of him with Katie? Oh, this is kind of sad. He was reaching for the photo. Benjamin collected a lot of information just to prove he was right. To save his daughter, maybe? I don't know.
So writers want, when a writer is writing, they want their protagonist to be active, not reactive to the environment. That the actions the protagonist takes in the story have meaning. And we wanted to create that feeling too, so we treat the player as a protagonist. So by having the player do this simple action of killing Ben, then later on, discovering more about what's going on in the story, they bear that responsibility for Ben's death. And then as we get deeper and deeper in, and they have to deal with what's going on at their organization, they have a much more visceral reaction than if it's a simply saw the same thing happen with another character. And so who has a control in a VR narrative? It's a push-pull. You create a world, you create the environment, the situations, but then you place a player in that situation and you let them go and experience it the way they want to experience it. And by doing that, it's surprising how powerful the stories can become. So, thank you.
Microphones,
All right.
if they work. Oh, hi.
Hello.
So we have a couple of minutes to answer questions if you have any, so here we are. There's no microphone, right?
Oh, is there no mic?
Project.
I'm interested to know how the hardware that you guys are using affects the interaction design, and how do you leverage like working with multiple hardware and the interactions of people?
Yeah,
Who wants to
I can answer a little
all-
bit. I think we can all answer like
Yeah.
quickly about that question. Well, you're definitely going to have, at least on our side, depending on the project, you can't really say the same things with the same hardware because you don't have the same inputs. So obviously, if the inputs are what, are your tools to drive something, you're going to have to tackle it. Brick-like, for example, is a project that works both on the Rift PlayStation, but also on the Gear VR with the controller. Because there is a controller, obviously, but the design has to be different. So the way you're navigating things is definitely not the same. So you kind of need to adapt and make sure that the system that you're using allows you to go from one to the other, I guess, easily, so that you don't have to rebuild the whole thing every time. But better think it, in my opinion, from scratch. Like if you experience, what are you going to use? What kind of inputs are you using? If you're doing HoloLens, you're not going to have the same, obviously, controllers than you're going to have on PlayStation. Some of them are front-facing, some of them you can turn around. So you really need to figure out if you're going to have to do different versions and design them differently. If you're doing location-based entertainment too, it's different. So you kind of have to make if you want it on a lot of platforms, you're going to have to make it a bit responsive, depending on what it is, I guess.
Yeah.
I can answer a lot to that because the Price of Freedom was developed for the Vive, so with room scale in mind. And in fact, there is actually no teleporting in that experience whatsoever. Everything is based on just moving about the room, using doors and other little tricks we use to get you through different spaces. Because we designed with the room scale in mind, it has kind of remained a Vive experience, and we're working on porting it. But if you want to support multiple systems, you really have to sort of design with that in mind in the beginning, because different systems, they have different sets of buttons they give you. They have different approaches to room scale. And so especially if you want to be multi-platform, you need to think about it at the very, very beginning and then go from there rather than try to port. So, yeah.
Yeah.
This is a question for Danny and probably Amy. When you were designing your experiences, how much consideration was given to runtime, to the time that somebody's going to be immersed? What were your thoughts on that? Because I think yours was 2 hours long.
Yeah.
That seems to be really long in VR.
So, and this actually for us goes a little bit back to the question of thinking about the hardware. So when we decided to make a long-form VR narrative for mobile hardware, we realized our runtime was longer than the battery time. And so then that inherently makes it going to be something that is going to be experienced in multiple breaks. And so into the narrative, we kind of wrote this job cycle where you take a job, you escape into the backstage, you get caught, like rinse and repeat. And so we did design the narrative specifically to accommodate the fact that this will be played in multiple sessions and on a hardware that requires it to be played in multiple sessions?
Yeah, in our case, the price of freedom is about 20 minutes, 15 to 20, depending on how fast you move through it. So a lot of that consideration was, that felt like a good amount of time that we could both create the story we wanted in the amount of time we had to do it, but also, you know, that's kind of a comfortable amount of time to spend in a VR headset, and we weren't planning on doing something that continued and had these breaks. But we are working on new projects that are longer form, and we are giving that very same consideration where, yeah, maybe it's longer form, but there are these like 15-minute chunks that you can kind of experience, you know, it feels like a good experience in one 15-minute setting.
Yeah, and also the audience, like, they're used to playing 20 hours of gameplay.
Yeah.
So usually when you put out a 2-hour experience, they start complaining that it's actually too short.
Yeah, I get more complaints that way.
Get a lot of that.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you check our Steam page, it's like, it's really, really good, but it's short, so.
So maybe time for one quick one. Can we go right back?
So often we talked about the relationship of control and sort of giving up sort of like authorship or control to the person who's having an experience. Can you speak about some of the challenges of doing that?
Yes.
Who has a lot
Who
of
wants to go
challenges
first?
with
Would I
that?
talk?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not
You
necessarily.
didn't hear the question? Yeah, the question is authorship. So how do you give the relationship between giving freedom to the user by still having a storyline going on?
Yeah. So for us, it was less of giving up the authorship of it, and more just changing the way we think about authorship to designing a system that can kind of like accommodate a bunch of interactions. So the authorship is no longer in the like.
Middle person who wasn't trying to trick the user.
Everyone's trying to trick.
We're all tricking the user, yeah.
So that's just art.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, so, well, emotionally, it's still hard, because you're still like, oh, you know, especially if I do a play test and someone like totally skips like reading several things, and you're like, but there's such good stuff there that I wrote. But you realize, you know, they're having a better experience by having that freedom, so you kind of, you know, you take it in stride. And we did design our narrative. It does kind of hold you at a couple points where this is part of it. We really want you to be present for this moment. And, you know, we just kind of, I guess, let it go. Yeah, there is kind of this emotional thing to it, but it's part of the process of dealing with it. And, you know, I guess.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you all.
Thanks.
And we'll be up here if you want to talk.